Hello friends. Prepare to enter the desolate world of Shawshank Prison. A successful banker named Andy Dufresne, wrongly convicted of a crime he didn't commit, finds himself trapped within its cold, unforgiving walls. Hope seems a distant dream in this brutal environment, but Andy, with quiet determination, refuses to be broken. His journey leads him to an unlikely friendship with a seasoned inmate named Red. Get ready for a story of resilience, hope, and the fight for redemption in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. This is the Shawshank Redemption. The year is 1947 and we're introduced to Andy Dufresne, a seemingly ordinary banker from Maine. He's wrongfully convicted of murdering his wife and her boyfriend, a golf pro. Since Maine doesn't have the death penalty, he's sentenced to spend the rest of his life, basically forever, in the brutal Shawshank prison. Andy insists he's innocent, but his calm and collected demeanor makes him seem guilty to the other inmates. At the same time, we meet Ellis "Red" Redding, another prisoner at Shawshank. Red's been there for 2 decades and just had a hearing to see if he could be released early on parole. Even though he's behaved well, they decide to keep him locked up. But Red doesn't seem too fazed by this. He's known as a resourceful guy who can smuggle in all sorts of things for other prisoners, anything from cigarettes to a little radio to make life a bit more bearable. There's a harsh tradition for new arrivals at Shawshank. The inmates make bets on which one of them will lose it completely during their very first night in prison. They figure Andy, the newcomer, will be the weak link and crack under pressure. However, Andy remains composed even when a guard brutalizes another new prisoner. Sadly, that prisoner doesn't survive the night. A month or so later, Andy seeks out Red because of his reputation for finding things. He asks for a seemingly harmless tool, a small rock hammer, claiming it's for a hobby of collecting and carving rocks. Red is suspicious at first, wondering if Andy might have some hidden motive for wanting the hammer, but Andy just laughs it off. Red agrees to get the hammer for him, but also warns Andy about a dangerous group of inmates called the Sisters, who prey on weaker prisoners. The leader of this group, Boggs, even seems to have a strange fixation on Andy. Even though the other prisoners see Andy as cold and distant, Red feels a connection with him for some reason. Red secretly has a hunch that Andy might be planning to use the hammer to escape someday, but when he finally sees the tiny size of the tool, he realizes that idea is pretty ridiculous. The first 2 years are brutal for Andy. He spends most of his time working in the prison laundry, a tough and unpleasant job. Even worse, he's constantly targeted by a dangerous group of inmates called the Sisters, who are led by a guy named Boggs. Andy fights back every time they attack him, but they overpower him and he gets beaten and hurt regularly. Despite the pain and humiliation, Andy never tells anyone what's happening. One day, there's a change of pace. There's a work detail to fix the roof on a prison building, and Red uses his connections to get Andy and some friends assigned to the job. It's a welcome break from the usual prison routine, and they even get to enjoy some fresh air and sunshine. While they're working on the roof, Andy overhears a prison guard complaining about taxes. Remembering his skills as a banker, Andy takes a big chance. Even though the guard is a big, mean guy who could easily hurt him, Andy approaches him and explains a way to avoid paying taxes on some money he inherited. The guard is impressed and agrees to let Andy help him out, in exchange for some cold beers for the crew working on the roof. Red figures Andy did this partly to gain favor with the guards, but also because it gave him a chance to feel useful and normal again, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Later, Andy makes another surprising request from Red. He asks for a big poster of a beautiful movie star named Rita Hayworth. Red is surprised, but manages to get the poster for him. Unfortunately, just as Andy is leaving the prison movie theater, he runs into the Sisters again. This time, things get really bad. They beat Andy so severely that he ends up in the prison infirmary for a month. The good news is that Boggs, the leader of the Sisters, gets into even bigger trouble. The guards beat him so badly that he can't walk anymore and has to be transferred to another prison hospital. The Sisters, with their leader gone, never bother Andy again. When Andy finally gets out of the infirmary, he finds a nice surprise waiting for him in his cell. Red and his friends have left him a pile of rocks to carve and the giant Rita Hayworth poster he requested. Meanwhile, the warden of the prison, a man named Warden Norton, hears about how Andy helped the guard with his taxes. He becomes curious about Andy and decides to pay him a surprise visit in his cell. They end up having a conversation about the Bible, and the warden seems impressed by Andy. He even leaves the Bible with Andy, telling him that salvation lays within. Andy gets some good news. He's assigned to a new job working in the prison library with an older inmate named Brooks. It turns out the guards picked Andy for this job because they heard about his skills with money. Soon, guards are lining up for Andy's financial advice, even guards from other prisons. Even the warden himself becomes one of Andy's clients. Things take a sad turn with Brooks. He's been in prison for 50 years and has become so used to prison life that he can't imagine being outside. He even threatens to kill another inmate to avoid being paroled. Andy is able to calm him down, but sadly, Brooks can't adjust to life on the outside after he's finally released. He ends up taking his own life. This event shakes Andy, but it also strengthens his resolve to improve the prison library. Andy sets himself a new goal: to get more books and resources for the library. He starts by writing letters to the state government, asking for money. At first, they ignore him, but Andy is persistent. He keeps writing for years, and finally, they send him a small amount of money and some old books. Even though this isn't much, Andy sees it as a victory and keeps pushing. One day, a box arrives with even more books and some old records. Among the records, Andy finds a beautiful piece of music by Mozart. He gets an idea. He locks a guard in the bathroom and plays the music over the prison loudspeaker system. For a brief moment, the entire prison is filled with beautiful music. The prisoners are transported, feeling a sense of freedom they haven't felt in years. The warden, however, is furious. He throws Andy in solitary confinement for punishment. Even in solitary, Andy finds comfort in the memory of the music. When he gets out, he talks to his friends about the power of hope. He believes that hope can help them survive prison. Red disagrees. He thinks hope is dangerous in a place like Shawshank, and that it's better to just accept your situation. This disagreement creates tension between Andy and Red. They both care about each other, but they have different ways of coping with prison life. Meanwhile, Red has another parole hearing and gets rejected again. He's been in prison for 30 years now, and he's starting to feel defeated. Andy gives him a harmonica as a small gift, and Red gives Andy a poster of Marilyn Monroe. Even though things are tough, they're still looking out for each other. After the Mozart incident, it seems like the government finally gives up trying to ignore Andy. They give him a small budget each year to improve the prison library. With this money, Andy is able to knock down walls, expand the space, and create a much bigger and better library. He even names it after his friend Brooks. The library becomes the best one in the entire state, and Andy starts helping other inmates get their high school diplomas. He figures that an education will help them get better jobs once they're finally released. Meanwhile, the warden is cooking up a scheme to make some money. He uses prison inmates as cheap labor to win contracts for construction projects. He even lets other companies win bids sometimes, as long as they pay him a bribe. This is where Andy's financial skills come in handy again. He creates a fake identity for someone named Randall Stevens. This fake person has all the official paperwork, like a birth certificate and driver's license. Andy uses this fake identity to set up bank accounts and investments to launder all the money the warden is making from his scheme. If anyone ever investigates, they'll be chasing a ghost, a person who doesn't even exist. Andy tells Red about all of this, and even jokes that he had to go to prison to learn how to be a crook. In 1965, a new young inmate named Tommy arrives at Shawshank. He's easygoing and popular with the other prisoners. Andy and Red both become friends with him. When Tommy tells them he's been in and out of prison since he was a teenager, Andy encourages him to consider a different career path. He sees potential in Tommy and doesn't want him to keep getting arrested. Tommy seems interested in changing his life, and Andy even helps him study for his high school equivalency exam. There's a turning point for Andy when Tommy tells a story about a former cellmate from another prison. This cellmate bragged about killing a man who was a pro golfer, along with the golfer's lover. The woman's husband, a banker, supposedly went to prison for those murders. This story sounds suspiciously familiar to Andy, and he starts to wonder, could this be the truth about what landed him in Shawshank all those years ago? Andy has a glimmer of hope. A new inmate named Tommy tells him a story about a former cellmate who bragged about committing the murders Andy was wrongly convicted of. With this new information, Andy goes to Warden Norton, hoping he'll help him get a new trial, but things don't go as planned. The warden doesn't believe Tommy's story and throws Andy in solitary confinement for a month, the longest anyone can remember. This punishment makes the other inmates wonder if Andy might really be innocent. Meanwhile, there's a bit of good news. Tommy gets a letter saying he passed his high school equivalency exam, thanks in part to Andy's help. This makes Andy smile, even though he's locked up in solitary. Unfortunately, Tommy's good news is short-lived. The warden calls him out for a private meeting and then has him killed to keep him quiet. When Andy gets out of solitary, the warden tells him a lie about Tommy trying to escape. Andy is devastated. He tells the warden he won't work on his money laundering scheme anymore. The warden threatens to shut down the library and make Andy's life miserable, and throws him back in solitary for another month to think things through. When Andy finally gets out, he's depressed. He talks to Red about his wife and how he feels responsible for her death, even though he didn't kill her. He also talks about his dream of retiring to a beach town in Mexico someday. He even asks Red to come with him, but Red refuses. He thinks he's been in prison too long and wouldn't be able to adjust to life outside. Red is worried about Andy. He seems to be losing hope, and Red fears he might try to hurt himself. To make matters worse, Andy asks a strange favor from Red. He asks Red to promise that if he ever gets paroled, he'll go to a specific spot in Maine and dig up something that Andy hid there. Red agrees, but he's scared. Meanwhile, the warden asks Andy to do some chores for him before bed. As the lights go out in the prison, Red has a feeling this might be the longest night of his life. He's worried sick about his friend Andy. The next morning, the guards realize Andy is missing. His cell is empty, and he didn't answer the roll call. The warden is alarmed too, because he finds Andy's shoes in his own shoebox instead of his own. It turns out Andy escaped during the night. Red says he doesn't know anything about it, but the warden doesn't believe him. In a rage, the warden throws things around Andy's cell and accidentally punches a hole in the wall behind the poster. Through a series of flashbacks, we learn how Andy pulled off this amazing escape. Remember way back when Andy first got his rock hammer? He noticed how weak the walls were and figured he might be able to tunnel out someday. He started chipping away at the wall at night, hiding the dirt in his pockets and then throwing it away later. He hid the hole behind a giant poster of a beautiful woman, first Rita Hayworth, then Marilyn Monroe, and finally Raquel Welch. He also did other things to keep himself busy and stay sane in prison. He didn't want to end up like Brooks, who became institutionalized after spending so many years locked up. The night of the escape, Andy wore the warden's clothes under his own. Luckily, no one noticed the warden's fancy shoes on Andy's feet, not even Red. He packed a bag with some belongings and squeezed out of the hole he'd made in the wall. The tunnel led him to a sewage pipe. He used a rock to break the pipe open during a thunderstorm and then crawled through hundreds of yards of sewage. Finally, he emerged into a stream outside the prison walls. The guards later found his prison clothes, some soap, and his worn-out rock hammer, but Andy was gone. Andy is a resourceful and determined man. He escapes prison using a tunnel he meticulously carved over many years, hidden behind a movie poster. He even outsmarts the warden by wearing the warden's clothes under his own during his escape, a clever trick that goes unnoticed. After escaping, Andy heads straight to a bank where he had been secretly hiding the money the warden stole from the prison through a money laundering scheme. Using a fake name he created, Andy cleans out the account, taking all the stolen money with him. Before leaving the bank, he has them mail a package to a local newspaper. This package isn't just any package, it contains evidence that exposes the warden's crimes. The authorities don't waste any time investigating the warden. They raid Shawshank Prison and arrest a guard for killing Tommy, the young inmate who might have helped Andy prove his innocence. The warden himself is also taken into custody. Realizing Andy outsmarted him and took all the stolen money, the warden becomes overwhelmed. He checks his safe, expecting to find his financial records, but instead finds a Bible he once gave to Andy. There's a note tucked inside referencing the warden's own words about finding salvation. But there's a twist, the pages of the Bible have been cut out in the exact shape of Andy's rock hammer, the very tool he used to tunnel his way out of prison. It's a symbolic message from Andy, a final act of defiance. The police arrive to arrest the warden, but he can't face the consequences of his actions. He tragically takes his own life. Back inside the prison walls, Red receives a postcard from Texas with no message. He takes this as a sign from Andy that he made it safely to Mexico, a place Andy once dreamed of retiring to. Red is happy for his friend but also feels a deep sense of loss. He misses Andy's companionship and feels depressed. At his next parole hearing, Red gives a speech that comes from the heart. He tells the parole board that he understands the seriousness of his crimes and expresses his remorse. He's not asking for forgiveness, but simply the chance to move on with his life on the outside. The board is finally convinced and grants Red parole. After years behind bars, Red is a free man again. He goes to work at the same place his friend Brooks once did. Walking by the spot where Brooks tragically took his own life, Red sees the message Brooks carved into a wooden beam, a sad reminder of the dangers of institutionalization and the difficulty some people face adjusting to life after prison. Red himself struggles to adjust at times. He even contemplated going back to prison, the only place that's felt familiar for most of his adult life. But then he remembers the promise he made to Andy. He sees some compasses in a pawn shop window and decides to buy one. This small act seems symbolic. Just like a compass helps you navigate, Red needs direction in his new life as a free man. He may be unsure of what the future holds, but with Andy's memory as a guide, he's finally determined to move forward. Following the promise he made to Andy, Red hitches a ride to Buxton, Maine. He finds the spot Andy described and, under a large black rock, discovers a box full of money. There's also a message from Andy telling him to come to a beach town in Mexico. Andy doesn't mention the town's name in case the letter gets intercepted, but he says he needs Red's help with the project. This discovery fills Red with a sense of hope and excitement he hasn't felt in years. He finally understands the power of hope that Andy always talked about. Red carves a message into the wooden beam, adding his name next to Brooks. Then, he decides to break his parole and leaves the halfway house. He figures no one will put much effort into finding an old crook like him. Red takes a bus to Mexico and crosses the border. Finally, on a beautiful beach on the Pacific coast, he finds Andy. Andy is working on an old boat, just like he always dreamed of doing. The two friends are reunited at last. Thank you so much for staying until now. If you like this movie, don't forget to like and subscribe. We will meet again in another interesting movie.